The Endurance was the last hope of humanity. The Earth, ravaged by war, disease, and resource depletion, had only a handful of survivors left. The great cities, once filled with life and promise, now lay in ruins. Mankind had sent out a call to the stars, but no one came to help. The great dream of reaching for the stars and finding allies in the galaxy had failed. Instead, Earth was dying, and it was up to this ship and its crew to carry humanity's last hope. Captain Maria Hayes stood at the bridge of the Endurance, her eyes fixed on the dark void of space ahead. The mission was simple: take the remaining resources, supplies, and knowledge of Earth and find a new world to settle. Yet there was something more that weighed heavily on her heart. Everyone knew they would never return. This wasn't just another mission. This was humanity's final chance at survival. The crew had trained for years, but no amount of preparation could truly prepare them for what lay ahead. The ship was equipped with everything they would need to survive in the unknown, but no one could predict what dangers lay in the vast emptiness of space. The fear of the unknown gnawed at them every day, but it was a fear they had no choice but to ignore. The Endurance was their lifeline, and it would carry them into the stars, never to see Earth again. Maria glanced at her crew. Lieutenant Ethan Carter, the ship's first officer, stood next to her, his eyes just as focused but with an edge of uncertainty. "Captain, we're ready for launch," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but Maria could tell he was holding something back. Fear, perhaps, or the knowledge that this was the beginning of something they couldn't stop. She couldn't tell, but she didn't need to. She was feeling it too. "Take us out, Lieutenant," she ordered, trying to steady her own nerves. She couldn't let her crew see her doubt. She couldn't let them see that she was terrified. The Endurance had been designed for this mission. Its engines were state-of-the-art, capable of reaching speeds that no ship before it had ever managed. The power and promise of the ship were incredible. Still, the reality was harsh. Even though the ship's course was set and everything was ready, no one could deny the truth. They were leaving everything behind: friends, family, the life they knew. For what? An unknown future? As the engines hummed to life and the ship broke free from Earth's atmosphere, there was no turning back. The familiar view of Earth slowly faded into the distance, swallowed by the vastness of space. The crew stood in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts, knowing that this was their last glimpse of home. In the depths of space, there were no guarantees. The ship's mission was to travel to a distant star system, one that scientists believed had the potential for human life. But there was no certainty. There were no promises, no backup plans. They were alone. Maria watched as the last traces of Earth vanished from view. The feeling of isolation hit her like a cold wave. She turned to Lieutenant Carter, who was staring at the stars ahead. The quiet tension was palpable. "Do you think we'll find something out there?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of doubt. Carter turned to her, his face a mask of resolve. "We have to," he said. "It's our only chance." Maria nodded, but the doubt lingered. How could they possibly find a new home? Was there truly a place for humanity in this vast, uncharted galaxy? And if there was, would it even be safe? As the Endurance continued its journey, the crew moved into their routines. Days turned into weeks, and the isolation began to settle in. Even though the ship was filled with life, it felt eerily quiet. There were no familiar faces around, no friends to talk to. The crew members kept to themselves, each dealing with the weight of the mission in their own way. Some tried to stay busy, others turned inward, haunted by the thought of never seeing their families again. But they had a job to do. They couldn't afford to dwell on the past. They had to keep going. One night, as Maria stood alone in the observation deck looking out at the endless expanse of stars, her mind wandered back to Earth. She thought about the life she had left behind, the friends she had lost, the memories of a planet she would never see again. For a brief moment, the isolation was overwhelming, but she quickly shook it off. This wasn't the time to dwell on the past. They had a future to fight for, a future that only existed if they succeeded. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Carter over the intercom. "We've just received a message from Earth." Maria's heart skipped a beat. A message from Earth? She hadn't expected that. In fact, she hadn't expected to hear anything from Earth ever again. They had sent out a last desperate message before leaving, but they were far beyond any communication range now. Had someone managed to get through? Maria rushed to the communications room where Carter was standing by the console. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Carter hesitated before responding. "It's a warning, Captain. A warning that we might not be alone out here." Maria's stomach dropped. Not alone? The crew had known the risks of space, but they hadn't expected this. They had hoped to be the first humans to explore uncharted space. But now the darkness of the unknown felt even more terrifying. "Do you think it's a trick?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Captain. But I don't think we can ignore it." The Endurance had only just begun its journey, and already it seemed like the crew's worst fears were coming true. The future of humanity was uncertain, and the unknown forces that awaited them might be far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the vast emptiness of space seemed to stretch on endlessly. The Endurance sailed through the dark, its engines humming quietly as it drifted farther from Earth, the planet now nothing more than a pale blue dot in the distance. The crew had settled into their routines, but there was a growing sense of unease among them. The silence of space had begun to feel more oppressive with each passing day. They had left everything behind, and now in this cold void it seemed that even time had slowed. Captain Maria Hayes stood by the observation deck once more, staring into the infinite blackness. She had spent countless hours there, searching for anything that might give her some peace of mind. But space had nothing to offer but its endless stretch of stars. She longed for something familiar, something that would remind her of home. But nothing came. There was only the cold silence of the void. As the days dragged on, something began to feel off. There was an uneasiness that permeated the air. The crew was quiet, even more so than before. The usual banter that had once filled the ship's hallways had stopped. Instead, there were only hushed voices, nervous glances, and the ever-present feeling that something was watching them. One morning, the ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Mark Thompson, reported an unusual signal. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't even a transmission from Earth. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. It seemed to come from somewhere deep in the galaxy, far beyond their current position. Yet it felt so close, as though it was coming from just outside their ship. "Captain, you need to hear this," Lieutenant Thompson said, his voice laced with uncertainty. "We've picked up a signal. It's not from any known source, and it's unlike anything we've encountered." Maria walked to the communications room, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure why, but she knew that this signal was no ordinary transmission. It was a warning. Something inside her told her that whatever lay ahead was something the crew wasn't prepared for. "What do you make of it?" she asked Thompson, who was already working to filter out the noise and focus on the signal. "I don't know, Captain. The frequency is strange. It doesn't match any known patterns, and it's almost like it's calling us, but I can't trace it. It's as though it's being sent from everywhere and nowhere at once." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The idea of something or someone calling them in the vastness of space was terrifying. For a moment she wondered if the crew was just imagining things. The isolation could do strange things to people's minds. But no, this was different. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was out there. The signal continued, a steady rhythm that seemed to grow more urgent as the hours passed. Maria gathered the senior crew members for a meeting. They couldn't ignore this any longer. "It's not from Earth," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "We don't know who or what is sending it, but we can't dismiss it." Lieutenant Carter, the first officer, looked at her with a mix of concern and disbelief. "Captain, we've trained for this. We're explorers, not soldiers. If there's something out there, we need to understand it. We can't just assume it's a threat." I agree, Maria said. But we've been alone out here for weeks, and now something is calling us. We can't afford to take chances. As they continued to analyze the signal, Maria's mind raced. What could it be? Was it an alien civilization reaching out to them? Or something more dangerous? A predator, lurking in the depths of space waiting to strike? The possibilities were endless, and each one was more terrifying than the last. The signal grew louder and clearer as the hours passed, and with each pulse, it became harder to ignore. It felt like the ship itself was being drawn into it. The crew began to sense it too, the pull of something beyond their understanding, something that would either save them or destroy them. The ship's sensors began to pick up strange readings. The crew couldn't pinpoint the source, but the data was undeniable. Something was out there, and it was watching them. Maria ordered the crew to be on high alert. They were far from home, and they had no idea what dangers lay ahead. The signal was just the beginning. There was something more sinister lurking in the shadows of space, and it was getting closer. Hours later, a report came in from the ship's engineers. They had detected an unknown object moving in the distance, a massive shadow that didn't belong. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't an asteroid. It was something else entirely. "Captain, you need to see this," said Chief Engineer Miranda Watts, her voice filled with disbelief. Maria rushed to the observation deck. There, in the distance, she saw it. A massive, dark shape moving against the backdrop of stars. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It seemed to shift, its edges constantly changing, as if it wasn't entirely real. For a brief moment she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the shape was there. It was real. A deep sense of dread washed over Maria as she realized what they were dealing with. The signal had led them here, and now they were being watched by something beyond their comprehension. They weren't alone in the dark void of space. "Lieutenant Carter," Maria said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Prepare the crew. We don't know what's coming, but we need to. Be ready." The crew scrambled to their stations, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. The Endurance was no longer just a vessel of hope. It was now a ship caught in the grip of something far older, far darker than anything they had ever encountered. They had been abandoned in space, but they weren't alone. Something had found them, and it wasn't going to let them go. The quiet hum of the Endurance was now interrupted by the eerie feeling of tension hanging in the air. The crew had no idea what was approaching, but every passing moment brought them closer to an unknown fate. Captain Maria Hayes stood at the bridge, staring out into the blackness. The mysterious object was still visible, but now it was much closer. It was as if it was moving toward them, drawn to the ship. The sense of unease in her chest grew heavier with each passing second. Lieutenant Carter entered the bridge, his face as pale as the moonlight streaming through the windows. "Captain," he began, his voice low, "I've run every scan possible. That thing, and it's not from this galaxy. It's older than anything we've ever encountered, and it's massive. It's coming right for us." Maria felt her heart race. "How long until it's within firing range?" "Not long. We have minutes, if that." The crew scrambled to their positions. The Endurance wasn't a warship. It was a vessel built for exploration, peace, and hope, not for combat. But in this moment, it had to become something it wasn't. The weapon systems had been designed for self-defense, not full-on battle. Maria's mind raced. She had to make a decision. But there was no time to hesitate. "Prepare the defenses," she ordered. "We fight, or we die." The silence of space was broken by the hum of the weapon systems powering up, but the crew knew it wouldn't be enough. The unknown entity was unlike anything they had prepared for. They had no knowledge of its technology, its weapons, or its capabilities. Everything they knew about war, survival, and defense meant nothing here. Maria's thoughts flashed back to Earth, to the people they had left behind, to the millions who were counting on them. Could this truly be their last stand? A part of her hoped for a miracle, that somehow they could escape. But the truth was staring them in the face. There would be no rescue. This was it. Their survival depended on fighting back. As the massive shape loomed ever closer, the Endurance's scanners detected unusual energy signatures emanating from the object. It wasn't just an enemy ship. It was something far more menacing. The ship was alive in a way that nothing human-made could ever be. It seemed to pulse and shift, a living, breathing entity moving through space with terrifying grace. "We can't outrun it, Captain," Carter said, his voice grim. "It's faster than we are, and its energy signature is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's almost like it's alive." A cold chill ran through Maria as she understood. This wasn't just an enemy. This was something else. Something ancient. And it wasn't just trying to kill them, it was hunting them. "We have to strike first," Maria said firmly. "All hands prepare for battle." The Endurance shook as the first wave of fire from the alien vessel struck its shields. The impact was immense, but the shields held barely. Maria's heart raced as the ship was rocked by another wave of energy. The crew clung to their stations, their hands moving swiftly to keep the ship's systems online. It was a chaotic mess of flashing lights, warning sirens, and the constant threat of imminent destruction. The ship was barely able to maintain course as the alien vessel continued to pummel them with powerful blasts. "Damage report," Maria shouted. "Shields at 40%, Captain. Hull integrity holding, but not for long," Lieutenant Watts replied, her voice shaky. "Weapon systems are operational, but we're underpowered. We can't go toe-to-toe with this thing for long." Maria gritted her teeth. "Then we'll have to outsmart it." But even as she spoke the words, a terrifying realization set in. No matter how much they fought, no matter how much they tried to escape, this alien ship was far superior. It was like a predator stalking its prey. It knew they were weak, and it enjoyed the hunt. Suddenly, the Endurance was hit by a wave of energy so powerful that it knocked out the ship's primary power systems. The lights flickered and then died. The crew was plunged into darkness. "Report," Maria barked. "We've lost power to half of the ship's systems, Captain," Carter said, his voice tight with panic. "Weapons offline, we're sitting ducks." Maria's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the enemy, and without their weapons, they were defenseless. Their shields were failing, their power was out, and the enemy was closing in. For a brief moment, Maria felt the weight of it all. The silence of space, the cold emptiness, and the helplessness of being so far from home. It was all too much. But then, something snapped inside her. She couldn't let the Endurance die like this. Not without a fight. Not without giving everything. She had left. She turned to Carter with steely resolve. "Lieutenant, do you trust me?" "Of course, Captain, but we're running out of time." "I know," Maria interrupted, "but there's one last thing we can try." She quickly gave the order to reroute the remaining power to the ship's auxiliary systems. The ship's engines, though weak, could still be used to its advantage. The Endurance might not have the firepower to match the alien vessel, but it had something else. The element of surprise. With what little power they had left, Maria ordered the crew to execute a daring maneuver. The Endurance would use its remaining speed and agility to weave through the incoming fire, attempting to get close enough to the alien ship to deliver a direct hit. It was risky, but it was their only shot. "Brace for impact," Maria shouted. The Endurance lurched forward, narrowly dodging another blast from the alien ship. The crew held their breath as they closed the gap between them and their hunter. In that moment, everything was on the line. There was no turning back. The Endurance was about to make its final stand. The crew was about to fight for their lives, for humanity's future, against an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. The Endurance shuddered violently as another blast tore through its weakened hull, sending sparks and smoke swirling through the corridors. The battle had become a blur of flashing lights, warning alarms, and the deafening hum of the ship's failing systems. Every second felt like an eternity, and the crew's desperation grew with each passing moment. "Shields down to 15%, Captain," Lieutenant Watts called out from the engineering station, her voice tight with strain. "We're losing structural integrity. We can't keep this up much longer." Captain Maria Hayes gripped the armrest of her chair, her knuckles white with the effort. She had never imagined that it would come to this, that humanity's last hope would end in the cold void of space, crushed by a force they didn't understand. She had always believed that they could survive, that somehow they would find a way. But now, with the Endurance torn and battered, she wasn't so sure. "Damn it, we can't give up now," Maria growled, her voice filled with determination. "Prepare the last line of defense, we're not dying here." Lieutenant Carter's eyes met hers, filled with both determination and fear. "Captain, I don't know if there's anything left we can do. The alien ship is too powerful. We can't match its firepower, and our weapons are nearly useless." Maria's gaze never wavered. "Then we'll use something they don't expect. We'll use the one thing they won't be able to fight, the unpredictability of humanity." She glanced at the tactical display. The alien ship was closing in, its massive shape now dominating the screen. It seemed to pulse, almost as though it were alive, feeding off their desperation. The Endurance had taken so much damage already, and yet the alien ship pressed on, unfazed. "What are you thinking, Captain?" Carter asked, sensing the shift in her resolve. Maria paused, thinking fast. She didn't have time for a perfect plan. There was no more time for strategies. It was a risk, no, a gamble, but it was their only shot. "Reroute all remaining power to the engines," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We'll make a break for it. Full speed ahead. Use every last bit of energy we have." The crew exchanged nervous glances, but no one questioned her. They were out of options. If this didn't work, they were all dead anyway. The Endurance surged forward, its engines groaning under the strain. The ship's hull rattled as the last of its power was pushed to the limit. They were moving fast, faster than they had ever gone before, but the alien ship was still on their tail, its massive form looming ever closer. "We've got one shot at this," Maria muttered to herself. She didn't know if they could outrun the enemy, but she wasn't going to go down without a fight. As the Endurance rocketed forward, the alien vessel closed in, preparing to deliver the final blow. It was then that Maria noticed something strange, a sudden shift in the way the alien ship moved. It wasn't following them directly anymore, it was anticipating their moves. "Captain, they're adapting," Carter said, his voice thick with disbelief. "They're learning." Maria's stomach tightened. The alien ship wasn't just attacking, they were being hunted, tracked, analyzed. This wasn't just an assault, it was a methodical pursuit. They were being studied, and it was only a matter of time before the alien vessel figured out how to destroy them. "Full evasive maneuvers," Maria shouted, her voice full of urgency. The Endurance weaved through space in a desperate attempt to dodge the incoming fire, but it was no use. The alien ship was too fast, too precise. Another blast hit, and the Endurance lurched violently. The force sent the crew members flying against their restraints. Maria's head slammed against the side of the control panel, blood trickling down her temple. The room spun, but she fought through the pain. There was no time to rest, no time for weakness. "We've lost the aft engines," Watts yelled, her voice tinged with panic. "We're spinning out of control." Maria's heart raced as the ship started to veer wildly. The alien ship wasn't just attacking anymore, it was toying with them, waiting for the right moment to strike. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't outfight it. And now, they couldn't even control their own ship. "We're going to die out here," Carter muttered, his voice broken, but Maria's will remained unshaken. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when humanity's future hung in the balance. She pressed a button on her console, and the voice of the ship's AI came through the speakers. "Captain, all systems are failing. I recommend you evacuate the ship immediately." "No!" Maria snapped. "We're not abandoning the Endurance. This ship is humanity's last hope, and we'll fight until there's no breath left in our bodies." But deep down, she knew the truth. The Endurance was running out of time, and so was humanity. The alien ship was relentless, unyielding, and, if they didn't act fast, they would be nothing more than a forgotten relic in the void. Suddenly, a bright flash of light filled the bridge as the Endurance was struck once more. The entire ship trembled violently. This time the damage was catastrophic. The ship's power flickered out and the control systems went dead. The last of the lights on the bridge went out, leaving only the red glow of emergency alarms. They were adrift. Maria's heart sank, but she wasn't finished yet. There was one final plan, one final attempt to survive. She reached for the ship's emergency override and activated the last measure of defense. "It's all we have left," she whispered to herself, her fingers trembling as she typed in the code. "We're either going down in flames, or we're taking them with us." A final surge of power shot through the Endurance, its remaining weapon systems coming online just long enough for one last strike. But would it be enough? The alien ship was closing in, its massive form now almost within reach. This was it. This was humanity's final moment. The Endurance floated in the abyss, its systems dead and its crew on the edge of despair. The ship's hull was scarred and pockmarked by the relentless assault of the alien vessel. The once proud starship, humanity's last hope, was now little more than a drifting wreck in the cold emptiness of space. Captain Maria Hayes stood on the bridge, her face pale and her eyes haunted. Blood trickled down her forehead from the earlier impact, but the pain didn't matter anymore. There was nothing left. The ship was broken. The enemy was closing in. The last vestiges of hope were slipping away, like sand through her fingers. But despite the overwhelming odds, something deep within her refused to let go. She turned to her crew, the few remaining souls still clinging to the wreckage of humanity's dream. Lieutenant Carter, bloodied but defiant, stood at his post. Watts, the engineer, her hands shaking but determined, was doing her best to keep what little remained of the ship's systems alive. There was no fear left in their eyes, only the cold, harsh reality of survival. "We're not dead yet," Maria said, her voice firm. "We still have a chance." Her words hung in the air, but they were met with silence. The crew had lost almost all faith. They knew the truth. They couldn't fight the alien ship. They couldn't outrun it. They were out of time. But Maria refused to let this be the end. They had fought too long, too hard for it to end like this. Endurance was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's spirit, its will to survive against all odds. With the last reserves of power, Maria ordered a final course change. The Endurance lurched forward once more, its engines sputtering but still functional. The alien ship, sensing the ship's final movements, closed in with terrifying precision. It was only moments away from delivering the final blow. "We're almost there," Carter said, his voice thick with tension. "But it's too late. The enemy's almost on us." Maria nodded grimly. "Then we'll make sure they know who we are." With her final words, she activated the ship's last weapon, an experimental technology that had never been fully tested. Hidden deep within the Endurance, a weapon of incredible power had been stored. It was an ancient prototype, something that could harness energy on a scale unimaginable to any species, even the alien ship pursuing them. The weapon was unstable, dangerous, and it had only been activated once in theory. But if there was one thing Maria had learned in her life, it was that humanity had never been afraid to take risks. The Endurance had made history by carrying the last survivors of Earth, and now it would make history again. For better or for worse, this was humanity's final stand. The ship's core hummed to life as the energy began to build. The alien vessel loomed closer, its weapons primed and ready for the kill. The crew braced themselves for the inevitable destruction. Maria gripped the armrest of her seat, staring straight ahead as the countdown on the tactical screen reached its final moments. "Get ready," she whispered. "This is it." The Endurance surged forward with every last ounce of power. The alien ship fired first, but the beam of energy missed, striking the void of space behind them. The Endurance had been quick, but not quick enough. Then, with a deafening roar, the hidden weapon activated. A wave of brilliant, blinding light erupted from the Endurance, sending shockwaves through the fabric of space itself. The energy rippled outward, pushing against everything in its path. The alien ship was caught off guard, its shields buckling under the sheer force of the blast. It wasn't enough to destroy the ship. No, the alien vessel was too powerful for that. But the wave of energy did something far worse. It disabled the enemy's systems, throwing its weapons offline and halting its advance. For a brief, fleeting moment, Time seemed to stop. The Endurance hung in space, battered, broken, but alive. The alien ship was crippled, its power sources flickering and its weapons now useless. The tables had turned. Maria stared at the display. The alien ship, once so sure of its victory, was now struggling to regain control. Its massive form hung in space motionless while the Endurance drifted in the opposite direction, barely clinging to life. "We did it," Carter breathed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. Maria allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. "Not yet. We still have to finish it." But they had made it. Humanity had survived, against all odds. The Endurance, battered but unbroken, had done what no one had believed possible. It had taken everything they had, every ounce of strength, every last bit of hope, and now, against all logic, the crew was alive. The alien ship, now crippled, attempted to flee. It was no longer a predator. It was just another ship lost in the cold vastness of space. The Endurance, despite its wounds, chased after it with relentless resolve. Humanity had been abandoned, left for dead, but it wasn't going to let the universe forget. The Endurance may have been the last ship of its kind, but the legacy of humanity, its resilience, its ingenuity, would live on. The galaxy had just learned a harsh lesson. Never underestimate the spirit of mankind. Maria turned to her crew, their faces worn but victorious. "We're not just surviving anymore," she said. "We're taking the fight to them."